So those are various, just to allude to the various models of ideal societies, okay? And then there are dystopias, ones that go bad, right? 1984, Brave New World, those are some in the last century. Okay? Formally developed into a political theory, okay? A theory concerning policy, okay? Which is supposedly derived from a prescription. Okay? Someone says, let's be pagan. Can you derive a description from a prescription? Let's be pagan. Only if you use it as the notion of a description, excuse me, a prescription, as a cover-up, okay? And you're using it, and behind the scenes you're doing something else where you're really sort of fooling people. But that's not what we're talking about here. Because as soon as there are people being fooled, okay, and in a counterproductive sort of way, we're working towards a description at that point in time, okay? With criteria being used, already determined, not constantly changed. You know, you can get a little bit of an example. We have in the States, and every other state has a constitution of some kind or another, okay? And usually it's open to being amended, okay, and changed to make differences, okay? Now, that is not an example, however, of a libidinal resource or economy. It's just all by itself. Human beings have no control over it, okay? So the thought that we can take a libidinal set of forces and energies and work them into a political economy is you don't work them in, okay? You don't work them in. You, in a sense, what you're doing is sending out like weird calls, okay, to powers that be, okay? And you would make up rules on how to do that, okay? Because where do you go to find a libidinal economy? An example of one. You can't. You can't find it. It's not something that can be found. It's like, in a sense, the unconscious mind. I'm putting a particular spin on this, okay? Yeah. Because advertising can be used for that, okay? We know that, and we know it, and we go out and buy the damn thing anyway. Okay, it's not going to make me more lovable, you know, but I'll go and buy it. Okay? That can ground. This is a key word here. The prescription that can then ground a description of a social practice. So, descriptives cannot be really derived from prescriptives, and he mentions this over and over again. What a prescriptive says is, written up here is prescription, and all that you have here can be totally and constantly and perpetually, for perpetuity, revised, 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 revised. Okay? Nothing is fixed at all. So what would justice be like if it were thought of in terms of prescription? He asks that question. He gives the example of Aristotle's judge, okay, who's working out of what? Out of a sense of phronesis, which I forget how he translates it. Or it gets translated here, it's not correct. It's out of a sense of wisdom. In other words, a lot of experience. And also, and this is one of the values, it has to be balanced. Okay? There has to be this scale here. And if you have this disproportionate set of relationships, what happens is that the judge has got to find the tare, T-A-R-E, okay, that can be put here to balance this right here. It's a throwaway. What would you take out of here, okay, to get this in balance, okay? And that's the metaphor for this kind of thinking, which is that of prescription. Now, normally, this means this, and this means this in everyday language, okay? So you have to be careful of that kind of confusion, okay? But the notion of prescription is that every moment you write is a moment to unwrite what you have written. So it's complete flux. It's not held down. This is the law, and therefore you must follow it. And do not, because if you do, we're going to get you. That would be a descriptive notion. We cannot tolerate artists, poets, rhapsodes, whatever, in the Republic. So they have to be excluded. Okay. In other words, we won't let anything of the third order, simulacrum. In other words, a painting of a bed, no. Okay. The ideal of the bed is first order. The attempt to represent or make that ideal is a second order, and you would have people who would draw it and design it, and a carpenter to make it, and so on, right? And that's good for that society. But the idea of painting one, or making one that you could, well, in Anti-Oedipus, there's this wonderful reference up front to a person who is a schizo painter, you know, starting out sort of normal, and it's as if the person is, all of a sudden, oh, I see what he's doing now. He's painting furniture, okay? But all of a sudden, more and more gets added to the lines and, you know, the design, until you don't know what in the world it is now. It's just totally bizarre, okay? So, it's as if somehow or another, if you do something that is not totally functional, a bed is something that is, let's say, elevated and you sleep on it, and that's what it's used for, okay? Other purposes as well, but basically, that's what it's all about, okay? Then Plato would have to exclude the poets, the rhapsodes, and so on. Poetry does not deal with ideal forms. He's not interested in that notion of beautiful at all. He thinks it leads to what? A loss of reason, rationality, being what your emotions are being. And look, his student, Aristotle, when he developed the Rhetoric, talked about three major proofs: logos, pathos, and ethos. Logos, that's reason. That's the argument based on reason. Pathos. Emotion. Right. Persuasion, in other words. The audience and its collective vision of something. And then ethos, the person's image. Which is the most important of these three? Just, you know, now I'm not, don't think in terms of a descriptive to determine, right, which one is the most important. But damn it, there are people, classicists and so on, who say, oh, well, logos is. Okay, let's get really pragmatic. Have you ever seen someone who gave a beautiful, no, not beautiful, an incredibly rational argument, and everything is absolutely perfect, but the person's image has been so damaged given something else he or she did that no one's going to pay attention to the argument. So, ergo, to use reason against reason, okay, your image. An image, well, you know, an image, that's not acceptable, because that's a simulacrum. So, I mean, you see why, in a sense, Baudrillard catches hell. When he says he wrote 3 articles before the Gulf War, he said the Gulf War will never take place. The Gulf War is not taking place, and the Gulf War did not take place. And everyone just immediately jumped to what they thought he was saying. Well, there are people out there being blown up, and, well, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying they're not being blown up. What does taking place mean? It's an idiom. What does it mean? What does it mean to take place?
To happen.
Occur.
To occur. To occupy space and time.
And what else?
Oh man, that's really clever. Okay, so it's a geopolitical construct. Taking place is seas and land. And
there's that. And taking place where you can even begin to think about it. The place isn't there anymore.
Right.
Where in the hell was the war fought? It was, you know, I don't know if you remember any of this, if you were old enough. But it was demonstrated by, who was the general, as computer games. The hits, the strikes.
Yeah.
That's what you saw. You didn't see anything else. There's this one guy who was a newsman, and he was captured by the Iraqis and was placed in jail for the whole time, and then he's liberated. And he says, tell me about the war, tell me. I mean, what happened? What happened? And you know, they said, well, you were in it, man. This is what you know it was. No, I mean, well, I didn't have a TV. I couldn't see it.
Wow.
So in a sense, it's the conceptual grounds for being able to see it and measure it. Is it happening? And if it is happening, how is it happening? And to whom? And so all of that kind of stuff, right, was taken away. So that's what he meant. And everyone just totally missed the whole point. That's why his book, Simulacrum, is in Matrix. It's really called, I think it's at the beginning of the film. So. Right? And I remember correctly.
Something like that.
Yeah, something is hidden in this book that has that title.
Yeah.
Pulls out the disc, or whatever it is, okay? You know, from print culture to digital culture.
One thing so this is, actually I've heard this kind of issue before, and we talked about, I guess in the last class, is Bernays, and we talked about it earlier, who's the nephew of Freud, who invented public relations, and he was all about the pathos. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is that you don't make decisions rationally.
That's right.
You don't go down a checklist and say, well, this and this and this and this and this, and do math on it,
Yep.
find out where it adds up and say that's acceptable.
And then you act on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Seldom do you act on it.
You don't do that.
Any academic who has to sit in academic committees knows that you sit there, you deliberate, you kill each other, you know, and then a decision is made. And then you know what? Most of the time, it's not followed up. It's not enacted.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. It is craziness.
And so the point is that when you do make a decision, you think, well, that feels good. I feel okay about that. I feel right about this thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like when my wife and I went to buy a house. We didn't go in and say, well, XYZ, XYZ, XYZ down the list. We said, wow, nice. Okay, yeah, it's roughly what we think about. Good enough, you know, and so you go with this non-rational thinking. And that's exactly what you were talking about. The problem is when you're talking about an ideal society, and given the kind of stuff that I'm thinking about, how do we manipulate, you know, if we cannot get out of that libidinal society, then I would suggest buying a small farm out in the country. You know, like that. It's, you know, there has to be some kind of a way out, or at least a direction that can be taken. So even if we fail, at least we feel like we did something.
If you find, he says, yourself, and you do, in this situation, okay, and someone tries to, you know, take some statement and use it as the grounding for a descriptive, the point is that this is perverting the very idea of prescription, okay, because there is no grounding for prescription.
Right.
The grounding is changing the rules, changing the rules. It's an ungrounding, constantly ungrounding. What am I standing on now? And so you find out that you, in other words, when there is and this is a metaphor, when God or foundationalism is gone, is dead, what is left is not anti-foundationalism, because if you're an anti-foundationalist, you nonetheless stand in the horizon of the very thing you say that you're against. When you hate somebody, you really dislike them, you have to get them. They own you. You are their emotional slave. Okay. But it's here is, as he says in the different. Okay. When we find ourselves in this sort of situation, what we must do is say, let's be pagan. That's part of the message in the book. Okay. Let's be pagan. Which means we're going to bear witness, this is his phrase, to new idioms. And notice how they were pulling these examples in these very small clips, as you pointed out, from a whole series, from nature, for example, and using them as rules. It's very, very interesting because there's another scene in the film. I need to sit down and watch that film. in which he's dead. De Niro, the character, is dead.
Phyllis is right.
And they sit around and they're playing this game. In his absence. And it's functioning as a kind of epidictic discourse, where it's praise of someone who is dead. How does one turn death into a beautiful death? I mean, did I mention this before, or was it another conversation? Athens was based on the notion of beautiful death. The sacrifices of men, okay, was going to be men who fought for Athens, okay, for the experiment known as Athens, which was not a city-state. That's not it. It was a polis, and it was really a kind of mystical experience for those people. Some classicists say, where they were constantly trying to work with this and work with that, And really, I mean, the whole thing, they go to the oracle. This whole thing about going to the oracle. And what is tell us the truth. Tell me what to do. And what does the oracle do? The symbol do? Jumps around all over the place like a crazy person and starts throwing words at them, as if spitting at them. In other words, gives them signs, not answers to questions. And the signs are, then you have to ask yourself, and they go over this over and over again, in their writings, well, now, what does this mean? How am I going to interpret this?